Well, since that time, of course, Dean Martin on his own has become a legend in this business, and a name synonymous with music and fun, not to mention the success, along with a sophisticated international image that would be the envy of most men. Recently, for example, Dino celebrated his 66th birthday in London, of all places. It was a tribute to him by the Variety Club of Great Britain, hosted by none other than Princess Anne.
What if everything you thought you knew about our planet turned out to be just a small piece of a much bigger puzzle? Across history, hidden connections, ancient mysteries, and advanced knowledge have been buried beneath layers of time and belief. In this video, we're diving deep into surprising truths and astonishing claims that challenge mainstream narratives. From ancient texts to modern science, what you're about to discover may forever change how you see the world around you. Are you ready to question everything?
I was very fortunate. Princess Anne gave me a birthday party, and I was more excited and more nervous meeting her than going on stage at the Apollo Theater. It just knocked me out. I never met anybody like her, any royalty at all.
Dean Martin's story starts far from the glittering lights of Hollywood or the buzzing clubs of Las Vegas. He was born Dino Paul Crocetti on June 7, 1917, in Steubenville, Ohio, a tough working-class town with a large immigrant population. His parents were Italian. His father, Gaetano Guy Crocetti, had emigrated from Abruzzo, Italy in 1913 and worked as a barber. His mother, Angela, was born in Ohio, but came from a northern Italian family. At home, Dino only heard Italian. In fact, he didn't speak any English until he was 5 years old, which set him apart from many of the other kids in town. That language barrier would shape much of his early life. When Dino started attending Grant Elementary School, his limited English and strong Italian accent made him an easy target. He was bullied and mocked by classmates, who mimicked his speech and looked down on his heritage. This kind of treatment wasn't unusual at the time. Immigrant families often faced discrimination. For young Dino, school became a place of discomfort rather than learning. He didn't fight back physically. Instead, he began relying on humor and charm as tools to cope and protect himself. Those early coping strategies would become defining traits of the man the world would come to know as Dean Martin. By the time Dino reached his teens, his frustration with school had grown. He left during the 10th grade, convinced that he could do better in the real world than in a classroom. He believed he was smarter than his teachers and felt that the formal education system wasn't offering him anything practical. Like many teenagers during the Great Depression, he wanted to help support his family. He started working various dangerous jobs, including time in the local steel mills, where injuries were frequent and safety protocols minimal. But Martin didn't just work in factories. He also ventured into the town's underworld. He became involved in bootlegging, illegal gambling, and running liquor, first during Prohibition and continuing even after it ended. He dealt cards, ran errands for local rackets, and learned how to handle himself around dangerous people. At just 16, he was already moving through Steubenville's criminal underground. It was a risky environment, but it taught him how to read people, stay calm under pressure, and keep his cool, skills that would later serve him well on stage and screen. During this time, he also tried his hand at boxing under the name Kid Crochet. He fought as a welterweight, racking up 12 matches. According to Martin, he won all but 11, a self-deprecating joke he would repeat later in his career. The sport left him with a broken nose, a cut lip, and busted knuckles. He didn't use proper hand wraps because he couldn't afford them. Years later, when he was starting to gain attention in show business, comedian Lou Costello paid for him to get his nose surgically fixed. The cosmetic tweak helped him fit the Hollywood mold more easily. But it was one of the few things about him that would ever be deliberately changed for fame. In his early 20s, Martin moved to New York to chase bigger dreams. He shared a tiny apartment with fellow performer Sonny King. The two friends were flat broke. On some nights, they would hold bare-knuckle boxing matches in their living room, charging people $5 each to watch. If they were lucky, they'd make $50, a considerable sum at the time. They also pulled stunts at local diners. One of them would pretend to take an urgent phone call so the other could finish both meals. When the diner owner caught on, he let them eat for a nickel each. Years later, when Martin and King had both found success, they returned to that same man and paid him back $25,000 each. Martin picked up whatever gigs he could to stay afloat. He worked in a backroom casino hidden behind a tobacco shop, acting as a croupier and keeping an eye out for police raids. At night, he sang in local clubs under the name Dino Martini, a stage name borrowed from opera singer Nino Martini. The name sounded glamorous, but his manager at the time, Sammy Watkins, suggested he drop it for something more mainstream. That's when Dino Martini became Dean Martin, a small shift that made a big difference. Ethnic names were often seen as a disadvantage in show business during that era. Dean Martin sounded less foreign and more marketable to a wider audience. His big break in music came when he joined the Ernie Mackay Orchestra. That's where he started to refine his vocal style. He looked up to singers like Perry Como and Harry Mills, adopting their smooth tones and laid-back delivery. At first, he was mostly imitating, but over time, he developed his own distinct voice. His singing wasn't technical or flashy. It was warm, relaxed, and effortlessly cool. This understated charm would become one of his trademarks. Then came the night that changed everything. It was 1946, and Dean Martin was performing at the 500 Club in Atlantic City. On the same bill was a young comic named Jerry Lewis. Martin sang. Lewis followed with his high-energy comedy. One night, their separate acts didn't land with the audience. The club owner was preparing to cancel them both. Out of desperation, they decided to improvise together on stage. Martin would sing a few lines, and Lewis would interrupt with jokes or slapstick gags. Martin played it cool and straight-faced while Lewis went wild. To everyone's surprise, the audience loved it. That spontaneous performance saved their careers and launched one of the most iconic comedy duos in American history. Their chemistry was instant and electric. Within weeks, the new Martin and Lewis act became the hottest thing on the nightclub circuit. They redefined live entertainment, combining music, comedy, and fast-paced improvisation in a way no one had done before. Their partnership was unlike anything audiences had seen. By 1948, Hollywood took notice. Producer Hal B. Wallace, best known for Casablanca, signed the duo to a film deal. The contract was modest, just $75,000, but it gave them something rare: creative freedom. Most actors in the studio system had to follow strict scripts and director's orders. But Wallace allowed Martin and Lewis to write and perform their routines the way they wanted. The risk paid off. Their first film, My Friend Irma, was a hit, and they followed it with a rapid stream of box office successes. Between 1949 and 1956, they made 16 movies together. That's more than 2 films a year, in addition to constant touring, radio shows, and television appearances. By 1952, they were among the biggest box office draws in the country, even topping the likes of John Wayne and Bing Crosby. Their fame cut across age groups and regions. Children loved their slapstick. Adults enjoyed the banter and songs. They were everywhere. But behind the scenes, things were changing. As time went on, it became clear to Martin that the public saw Jerry Lewis as the real star. One moment that hit particularly hard came in 1954, when Look magazine put Lewis alone on the cover and cropped Martin out. For Martin, it was more than an insult. It was a sign that people no longer valued his contribution. He wasn't just a straight man. He sang, acted, and carried the duo's charm. But that seemed to be overlooked. Tensions escalated. The friendship that once fueled their act began to erode. Martin felt overshadowed, underappreciated, and increasingly resentful. During the filming of their final movie together, Hollywood or Bust, the tension finally boiled over. Martin reportedly told Lewis, "You're nothing but a dollar sign," a line that summed up how he felt: used, sidelined, and hurt. Their split in 1956 shocked fans. They had defined a genre and an era. And then, suddenly, it was over. The two men wouldn't speak for 20 years. The end of Martin and Lewis wasn't just the end of a comedy team. It was the end of a friendship and a partnership that had once seemed unbreakable. For Dean Martin, it marked a turning point, a painful transition from being part of a beloved duo to facing an uncertain future on his own. Dean Martin's solo career didn't start off smoothly. After the incredibly public and painful split with Jerry Lewis, many people expected Martin to fade away. His critics didn't hold back either. Without the high-energy spark of Lewis next to him, Martin was written off as just a handsome voice, someone not quite capable of carrying a show or a film on his own. But Dean didn't seem too interested in proving anyone wrong. Instead, he quietly went to work rebuilding his career on his terms. He took a role in the 1958 film The Young Lions, acting alongside Marlon Brando and Montgomery Clift. It wasn't just a supporting role. Martin held his own in a serious, dramatic part, something few people thought he could pull off. The film was a commercial success, and it forced Hollywood to see him in a different light. Suddenly, he wasn't just the guy who cracked jokes and sang beside Jerry Lewis. He was an actor with range. Around the same time, Dean continued building his music career. He signed with Capitol Records and released several songs that showcased his smooth, easygoing vocal style. One of the biggest hits of his solo music career came in 1964 with Everybody Loves Somebody. The song climbed the charts and eventually knocked the Beatles off the #1 spot, a surprising feat in the middle of Beatlemania. The success of the track not only reaffirmed Martin's popularity, but also gave him a signature song that would stay with him for the rest of his life. Unlike many of his peers, Dean Martin didn't hustle for the spotlight. He didn't flood the airwaves with interviews or chase fame through scandal. What made him stand out was a relaxed, almost nonchalant charm. He didn't need to shout to be noticed. Whether he was crooning in a recording booth or standing still in a film scene, Dean had a way of drawing attention with his understated confidence. That understated quality became even more pronounced when he joined forces with a group of entertainers that would later be known as the Rat Pack. Led by Frank Sinatra, the Rat Pack included Martin, Sammy Davis Jr., Peter Lawford, and Joey Bishop. Together, they became a symbol of 1960s cool, performing in Las Vegas, appearing in films, and hosting high-profile events that attracted politicians, movie stars, and mob bosses alike. Martin was never officially the leader of the Rat Pack, but he was often seen as the glue that held the group together. He didn't try to outshine Sinatra. He wasn't as flashy as Davis or as quick-witted as Bishop, but his presence brought balance. He offered dry humor, unpredictable timing, and a genuine sense of ease that made audiences feel like they were watching a group of old friends joke around rather than a rehearsed show. Their performances at the Sands Hotel in Las Vegas became legendary. The audience never quite knew what to expect. Songs would be interrupted by jokes, impressions would turn into real arguments, and laughter often overtook the music. It felt spontaneous, even if much of it was planned in advance. Martin's role was always the laid-back sidekick, often pretending to be drunk on stage, holding a cigarette in one hand and a glass of what appeared to be whiskey in the other. Off stage, Dean's persona wasn't too far off from the one he presented to the public. But friends and colleagues have since said that the drunken image was just part of the act. The glass often contained apple juice. The slurred words were intentional. Martin was in control far more than he let on. And that sense of control is what helped him manage a busy schedule of films, television appearances, and concert dates. Dean also continued working steadily in film throughout the late 1950s and 1960s. One of his most well-known roles during this time was in Rio Bravo, 1959, a Western directed by Howard Hawks and starring John Wayne. In the film, Martin played a deputy sheriff struggling with alcoholism. The performance earned him critical praise and proved once again that he could handle dramatic material. His character had depth, pain, and moments of quiet dignity that reflected a side of Martin that audiences rarely saw in his Rat Pack persona. Despite his on-stage image, Dean Martin was not known for living a reckless lifestyle. Compared to Sinatra, who was often caught up in political and personal drama, Martin kept things simple. He preferred quiet evenings at home or games of golf over wild parties. Those close to him described him as private and sometimes distant, but rarely mean or arrogant. He didn't crave attention. In fact, he often tried to avoid it. Even so, his association with the Rat Pack meant he was pulled into the political and cultural world of the 1960s. The group openly supported John F. Kennedy's presidential campaign, and their performances sometimes blurred the lines between entertainment and politics. At the same time, The group's association with organized crime figures and their unapologetic behavior raised questions and earned them scrutiny. Martin himself was even watched by the FBI for his ties to certain figures, though there was never any serious legal trouble. In many ways, Martin's public and private lives were in contradiction. He played the lovable drunk on stage, but was sober and disciplined behind the scenes. He was part of a group known for loud, brash humor, yet he preferred quiet solitude. He was a major celebrity who seemed indifferent to fame. That duality made him both fascinating and hard to fully understand. By the end of the 1960s, Dean Martin had managed to reinvent himself in nearly every area of his career. He had moved past the shadow of Jerry Lewis. He had proven himself as a serious actor. He had built a successful solo music career. And he had become one of the defining faces of Las Vegas entertainment through the Rat Pack. Unlike many entertainers who fade after their first wave of success, Martin only seemed to grow more comfortable in his own skin. He didn't chase trends or try to stay relevant through reinvention. Instead, he leaned into what made him unique: his calm presence, his subtle humor, and a voice that felt effortless. The 1960s were not without challenges. The industry was changing, and the Rat Pack was starting to lose its cultural grip. Younger audiences were turning to rock and roll, and the counterculture movement didn't have much use for tuxedos and lounge singers. But Martin didn't panic. He adjusted quietly. He kept working. He kept showing up, and audiences kept showing up for him. In an era full of noise, Dean Martin's quiet confidence spoke volumes. He didn't demand attention, he earned it. Whether he was on a film set, in a recording studio, or joking around in a Vegas showroom, Martin brought something rare: a sense of ease that never felt fake, never felt forced. In a business built on performance, that kind of authenticity stood out. As the 1970s approached, the next phase of Martin's career was already taking shape, one that would take him into millions of living rooms across the country and help solidify his place as a permanent fixture in American pop culture. But the foundation had been laid. He had survived the fallout of Martin and Lewis, risen to solo fame, and become an icon of cool. And he had done it all without raising his voice. Dean Martin's career was already legendary by the time he stepped into television. In 1965, NBC offered him a weekly variety show, something they were sure would be a hit given his immense popularity. But Dean wasn't particularly interested. He didn't want to commit to a tight schedule and long hours. So he made a bold move. He set terms that he thought the network would never accept. He demanded an incredibly high salary, insisted that he only work one day a week, and refused rehearsals. To his surprise, NBC agreed to everything. The result was The Dean Martin Show, which quickly became a ratings success. The show ran for 9 seasons and was unlike most variety shows of the time. Martin would famously stroll onto the set, often with a drink in hand, and appear to wing it. While many assumed the show was entirely improvised, the reality was different. Scripts were carefully written, and supporting performers rehearsed in advance. Dean simply chose not to participate in any of the preparation. He would show up on taping day, read his lines from cue cards, and somehow make it all seem effortless. Martin's charm was undeniable. Audiences loved the casual way he interacted with guests, the way he could deliver jokes without even seeming to try, and his ability to make everyone, from Hollywood royalty to everyday viewers, feel like they were in on the fun. The drunk persona he played up became part of the brand. But in real life, it was mostly an act. While he did enjoy the occasional drink, the glass he held on stage was often filled with apple juice. He wasn't a heavy drinker, but he knew the routine worked, so he leaned into it. Following the variety show's success, Martin hosted the Dean Martin Celebrity Roast Specials. These events were built around the tradition of comedians and celebrities gently mocking one of their own in front of an audience. The roasts became popular for their blend of humor, nostalgia, and star power. Guests like Frank Sinatra, Lucille Ball, and Muhammad Ali were all honored or roasted by Martin and his rotating panel of entertainers. These specials continued into the 1980s, cementing Martin's place as one of television's most enduring figures. Behind the scenes, however, Martin's personal life was far more complicated. His image may have been that of a carefree entertainer, but at home, things weren't as smooth. He had been married 3 times. His first marriage, to Elizabeth Ann MacDonald, produced 4 children, but ended in divorce in 1949. His second marriage, to Jean Beager, is the one most closely associated with the peak of his fame. They had 3 children together and were considered one of Hollywood's golden couples. Jean was elegant and poised, often seen at Martin's side during public appearances. Their marriage lasted more than 2 decades, but like many relationships under the glare of fame, it suffered from distance, infidelity, and growing apart. Martin's work often kept him away, and his lifestyle didn't lend itself to consistency. Friends said he loved Jean, but he wasn't always able to show it in ways that mattered most. The two divorced in 1973, a split that affected Martin deeply, though he didn't speak much about it publicly. He married for a 3rd time in 1973, this time to Kathryn Hahn, a former receptionist. They were together for 3 years before divorcing in 1976. Martin adopted Hahn's daughter from a previous relationship, but by this time, his enthusiasm for personal connections had started to fade. After the end of his 3rd marriage, he withdrew further into a smaller world of familiar faces and old routines. Throughout his life, Dean Martin was known to keep his emotions close to the chest. He wasn't the type to dwell on the past or open up about his feelings. Colleagues described him as pleasant, but distant. He could be warm, especially with those he trusted. But there was always a boundary, a part of him that remained unreachable. Perhaps it was a coping mechanism. With the pressures of fame, the constant travel, and the expectations placed on him, there were few safe places to just be himself. Despite this emotional distance, Dean remained close to his children, particularly Dean Paul, whom he affectionately called Dino. Dean Paul was the child Martin seemed to identify with the most. Handsome and charming like his father, Dean Paul charted his own path. He first gained attention as a member of the pop group Dino, Desi, and Billy in the 1960s, alongside Desi Arnaz Jr. and Billy Hinchy. Later, he pursued a career in acting and aviation, becoming a respected pilot in the California Air National Guard. Martin watched his son's successes with pride. He would attend Dean Paul's tennis matches, cheer on his film roles, and brag about his skills as a pilot. There was a sparkle in his eye when he talked about Dean Paul, something not often seen in other contexts. Friends said it was the closest Martin came to fully expressing love. By the early 1980s, Dean Martin had begun to slow down. He was no longer taking on new projects with the same energy, and his live performances became more sporadic. Age was catching up with him, but he continued to work, appearing occasionally on television and on the Las Vegas stage. Even as the entertainment world around him changed, there remained an audience for his brand of cool detachment and effortless humor. Tragedy struck in 1987 when Dean Paul Martin died in a plane crash while flying with the Air National Guard. His aircraft went missing in a snowstorm near the San Bernardino Mountains, and it took days to locate the wreckage. Dean Paul was only 35 years old. The news devastated Martin. Those close to him said he was never the same after that day. He stopped performing regularly, and the light behind his eyes dimmed. Though he continued to appear in public now and then, it was clear that something fundamental had changed. The death of his son cut deeper than anyone could have expected. For a man who had always been guarded, Dean Martin's grief was evident in his silence. He withdrew almost entirely from the public eye, canceled shows, and avoided the media. While he had endured the breakdown of marriages and the slow unraveling of close friendships, losing Dean Paul seemed to pierce through every defense he'd ever built. In 1988, a year after his son's death, Martin reluctantly joined Frank Sinatra and Sammy Davis Jr. for a reunion tour. The idea was to rekindle the magic of the Rat Pack days, to bring the legends back together one more time. But it quickly became apparent that the energy and chemistry they once shared couldn't be recreated. Martin seemed distracted and tired. After a handful of shows, he bowed out of the tour, citing health issues. Liza Minnelli stepped in to replace him. Fans were disappointed, but many understood. Martin's heart just wasn't in it. This era marked the beginning of a long farewell. Though he lived another several years, Martin never truly returned to the spotlight. He preferred to spend his days at home or at a few familiar restaurants in Los Angeles. He rarely gave interviews and seldom ventured outside of his comfort zone. People who saw him during this time described a man who had aged rapidly, not just physically, but emotionally. It wasn't just that he had lost his son. It was as if he had lost the desire to engage with the world that had once adored him. Despite the sorrow and retreat, Dean Martin's legacy remained intact. He was still a beloved figure in entertainment, a symbol of a bygone era when style and ease were enough to hold a room. His music continued to be played, his shows rerun, and his influence recognized by a new generation of performers. Yet, behind that legacy was a story of loss, of missed chances, and of a man who perhaps gave more to the world than he ever got in return. Dean Martin, the legend, had spent decades making others laugh, making them swoon, and making it all look easy. But Dean Martin, the man, had faced heartbreak that even his smoothest song couldn't cover up. In recent years, much of the conversation about climate change has focused on carbon dioxide, but another powerful greenhouse gas, methane, is receiving growing attention. Methane is more than 80 times more potent than carbon dioxide over a 20-year period. Even though it remains in the atmosphere for a shorter time, its impact on warming is far more immediate. This has made methane a significant concern for scientists and policymakers alike. Methane emissions come from a variety of sources. Natural sources include wetlands, termites, and geological seepage. However, human activities are now the dominant force behind rising methane levels. Agriculture, particularly livestock farming, is a major contributor. When cows and other ruminants digest food, they release methane through a process known as enteric fermentation. In addition, manure management on large-scale farms also produces considerable methane. The energy sector is another key source. Oil and gas operations release methane during extraction, processing, storage, and transportation. Leaks from pipelines, compressor stations, and other equipment are common. Coal mining also contributes, as methane is released from coal seams. In urban areas, landfills are major emitters, as organic waste breaks down without oxygen and generates methane as a byproduct. Over the last few decades, atmospheric methane levels have risen sharply. Data from the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, NOAA, shows that 2023 saw one of the highest annual increases in methane since record-keeping began in the 1980s. Although there is some uncertainty about the exact sources behind the increase, it is clear that emissions are outpacing efforts to curb them. One of the challenges in addressing methane is that its sources are dispersed and often difficult to monitor. Unlike carbon dioxide, which is typically measured at large, fixed points like power plants, methane leaks can happen anywhere along a sprawling infrastructure. In agriculture, emissions come from millions of individual animals, making control more complex. Nevertheless, solutions are emerging. In the oil and gas sector, there are technologies that can detect and repair leaks more efficiently than ever before. Satellites, drones, and infrared cameras allow companies to identify problem areas quickly. There are also financial incentives. Preventing methane leaks means saving valuable products, natural gas, which companies can then sell. This creates a clear business case for action. Agriculture poses different challenges, but some innovations offer promise. Changes in animal feed can reduce the methane produced during digestion. For example, adding small amounts of certain seaweeds to cow diets has been shown to cut emissions significantly. Improving manure management through composting and anaerobic digesters can also lower methane output. These methods not only reduce emissions, but can also produce biogas for energy, offering dual benefits. Landfills are being tackled through better waste management practices. Capturing methane from landfills and using it as a renewable energy source is already being done in many places. Reducing the amount of organic waste sent to landfills through composting programs and food waste prevention campaigns also plays a role. Policy is a key part of the equation. In 2021, more than 100 countries joined the Global Methane Pledge, a commitment to cut global methane emissions by 30% by 2030. This voluntary agreement aims to deliver a major climate benefit in the short term. Given methane's potency, countries like the United States have rolled out specific regulations for methane emissions from the oil and gas sector. The European Union has proposed similar measures, with requirements for monitoring, reporting, and repairing leaks. Despite these efforts, progress has been uneven. Some countries lack the infrastructure or political will to implement strict controls. Others face economic challenges that make change more difficult. In many developing nations, livestock is a key part of rural life and income, which makes reform a sensitive issue. Additionally, fossil fuel-producing countries may resist measures seen as threatening their industries. A major factor influencing methane emissions is economic development. As countries grow, energy demand increases, often relying on fossil fuels. Without intervention, this can drive up methane emissions. At the same time, development also brings resources and capacity to invest in cleaner technologies. Balancing growth with climate action is one of the defining challenges of our time. Public awareness of methane's impact is still relatively low compared to carbon dioxide. Yet, addressing methane offers one of the fastest ways to slow global warming. Cutting methane now could significantly reduce the rate of warming over the next 2 decades, buying time as the world transitions to cleaner energy sources. Another area receiving attention is the role of wetlands and other ecosystems in the methane cycle. While wetlands emit methane naturally, they also serve as vital carbon sinks. Protecting these ecosystems is a delicate balancing act. Some researchers are exploring ways to manage wetlands to limit methane emissions without compromising their ecological value. In addition to mitigation, better measurement is critical. Recent advances in satellite technology allow scientists to track large methane plumes from space. This has led to the discovery of major leaks that were previously unknown. The International Methane Emissions Observatory and other global initiatives are working to provide more accurate, transparent data. This information can guide policy and hold emitters accountable. Innovation continues to play a role. In the startup world, companies are developing new approaches to methane capture and conversion. Some are working on modular systems that can turn methane into useful products like hydrogen or chemicals at the site of emissions. These technologies are still early stage, but highlight the growing interest in methane as both a climate challenge and a commercial opportunity. Ultimately, reducing methane emissions is about coordination. Governments, businesses, researchers, and communities all have a role to play. There is no single solution, but a combination of technologies, practices, and policies can make a meaningful difference. As the climate crisis intensifies, the urgency of tackling methane grows. It's also important to recognize that reducing methane brings co-benefits beyond climate. Improved air quality, better waste management, and more efficient agricultural systems all contribute to human health and economic resilience. These wider benefits can help build support for action, especially in regions where climate change may not be the top priority. Looking ahead, international cooperation will be essential. Methane doesn't respect borders, and its effects are global. Joint monitoring, shared technology, and coordinated policy can help ensure that efforts are effective and fair. Addressing methane is not only a climate imperative, but also a chance to make rapid, measurable progress in a warming world. While the focus on carbon dioxide remains vital, methane represents a major opportunity. The science is clear, the technologies exist, and the benefits are tangible. What remains is the will to act. As methane continues to shape our atmosphere, the choices made today will determine the pace and severity of tomorrow's climate.